Buju, Wagoshindagu, Minawa, Migazi, and Dodem, Gazagasqua, Jimekog, and Duanjiba. Hello, my name is Anton Troyer, and I was just giving you a brief introduction in my Ojibwe language to say that my native name is Wagosh, which means fox. I'm from the Eagle Clan, and I come to you from Leech Lake, which is one of the Ojibwe reservations in northern Minnesota. Thanks so much for joining today. I was asked to share a little bit about the Ojibwe cultural toolbox. It's amazing to me, after 500 pretty rough years, that the Ojibwe still have so much rich cultural patrimony. For myself, I'm a fluent speaker of our language and spend a lot of my time practicing our culture. We harvest a lot of our own food, make maple syrup and sugar. We harvest wild rice, berries, hunt, fish, gather. I spend a lot of time at ceremonies, but I'm also a college professor who works at Bemidji State University teaching our language. And I get to wear other hats too. So I do racial equity and cultural competency work. I'm an author who's published many books on Ojibwe history, language, and culture, as well as a number of broad Indigenous topics. So I'm really excited to share with you today a little bit about what's in the Ojibwe cultural toolbox. There's a lot to unpack. There's no way to do it all in one sitting. So among the things that I'd like to share with you is that I have a website with free resources that just has lists of books and information for people who want to learn more about Indigenous people. I've also got lists of resources for those interested in learning more about the Ojibwe language, and all of that is free. So later on in the video, I'll make sure that there's a posting so you know how to get a hold of and keep in touch with me and find all the free information that you're looking for. So a little bit just to kind of frame the exploration of Ojibwe culture. First of all, in the Ojibwe worldview, we often speak about cultural things in a set of four, as in four seasons. So just like we have four, seasons in the weather, spring, summer, fall, winter, we also have four seasons in a person's life. Spring is often represented by babies, summer by young people, fall, adults, winter, elders. And a lot of times when we are praying, we will pray that somebody gets to see all of their seasons as a way of saying, we hope that they have a long, healthy, happy life. And so I'll share a little bit about some of the Ojibwe cultural practices by season, as I think that'll provide a healthy way for you to understand the dynamics in Ojibwe culture. So spring is when the Ojibwe calendar begins. And we have a number of important teachings that come about in spring. The snow melts, the lakes start to open up. This is the time when we're actually harvesting maple sap and turning it into syrup and sugar. There's actually a lot of latent mineral content, so it's not just about sweets or a treat or just something you put on your pancakes. Although frankly, I have 9 kids and mine eat plenty of pancakes. But it's also about nutrition and food and part of our cyclical and seasonal harvest. In the Ojibwe world, when we take something like sap from a maple tree, or if we harvest a plant, an animal, a fish, a bird, that we're not supposed to be takers. And as a result, we have to provide a payment when we're going to hunt, fish, or gather. And the payment we use is actually tobacco. I think it's a really misunderstood part of the Ojibwe cultural practice. For us, we had teachings that we, in our creation story when we were first put here, that everything else was created ahead of us. The earth, the water, the plants, animals, birds, and fish. And humans were the last things created and put on earth. In fact, one of the kind of traditional artistic motifs we use in the Ojibwe world, kind of floral patterns, we use them in beadwork. I incorporated them on the cover for my latest book. And it does a couple of things. One is it's just inspired by the natural world around us, but it's also something that is a humble reminder of our place in creation. If humans disappeared from planet Earth, everything that was created and put here before us would get by just fine. In fact, probably better than ever. But if something put here before us disappeared, humans would surely perish too. We are dependent on those things and are meant to respect those things. So in our story too, we talk about how tobacco was placed there, the first plant, the tool that we were supposed to use in order to pay for anything else that we would take from creation. It's a means of showing respect. And the original tobacco, like the Virginia leaf tobacco plant, was used by many tribes all up and down the east coast of the United States, throughout the Great Lakes. But in our area, I live in northern Minnesota, we're right on the growing range for the original Virginia leaf tobacco. And so in my area, we actually have another form of tobacco that we use made out of the inner bark of red willow or red osier, which is one of the subspecies of dogwood. And so what we will do is often in the spring of the year, we will harvest some of the willow plants. To do that, what we'll do is we'll put tobacco offering by the tallest in a bunch of the willow brush, and we'll leave that one alone, like it's the chief plant. And then we'll pick some of the medium-sized ones that are around it. In the spring, you can actually run a fingernail straight down the outer bark and twist it, and the outermost layer of bark will pop right off. It's paper thin. And then the part we actually use for the tobacco is the next layer of bark. And you can use a butter knife or something like that, and it'll scrape right off. Once you've acquired enough, you can dry it out and kind of crunch it up. And then that's what we will actually use for tobacco. And I'm somebody who officiates at a lot of ceremonies and things like that. And I really encourage people to use our indigenous forms of tobacco. There are a number of benefits to doing that. One is when we make offerings to acquire the offering, it's more spiritually potent. Also, it's really important that we exercise healthy practices. The kind of tobacco you buy in a store is made from a Virginia leaf tobacco, but it's loaded with numerous chemical additives and things that obviously cause cancer and kill you if you use them. So when we plant, garden, and use our own indigenous tobacco seeds, or when we make tobacco out of red willow, you have something that is not just spiritually potent, but it is something that is actually not going to give you cancer and kill you. In fact, the red willow tobacco is what I often recommend for schools and programs in our area, because in addition to kids or people who are involved in the program being able to produce the tobacco on their own, it's not scientifically tobacco. And so you can still honor your tobacco-free school zone, your no smoking policy, and all of that, and still honor the indigenous use of a reciprocal offering when you're going to be taking something from Mother Earth. And it's a great way to kind of think about decolonizing our tobacco practice and using it in a healthy and productive way. So when I officiate at ceremonies, we usually require or at least request these traditional tobacco forms. And I think that is going to be the trend moving forward as Indigenous people reassert our own cultural practices and beliefs, even within our own space, which has sometimes been compromised by assimilation in the colonial process. As we look deeper into things that a family like mine might do in the springtime, we do numerous ceremonies, more than I'll have time to unpack for you in a talk like this. But for example, as the lakes open up, we will do a spring water ceremony, and we'll actually pick willow sticks, and we'll use diamond willow for these. We'll strip off the bark, and we'll make a little miniature raft for each member in our family. And on the raft, we'll kind of connect the sticks together with yarn or string. We will place offerings. And so there'll be often an item of used clothing, clean, used but clean, t-shirt or something like that. And then there'll be a little bit of food offering. Some people might use a little piece of a maple sugar cake or something like that. And there'll be tobacco. And then we'll actually have a feast on the shore. And then we'll launch the rafts, one for each member of the family. And it's a way of saying, please accept these offerings and look over my family when we're out and about on the waterways. So it's a way of paying for protection and good luck when people are out harvesting fish or doing things like that. We also, have traditional harvest practices every season. And, spring is the time when we do our maple sugar harvest. Fishing opens up later in the spring, and then we get into the summer harvest rotation. We do, in the cycle of a human being, we also do a lot of ceremonies that are for babies. Like there are all kinds of cultural practices when a woman is pregnant and the baby's growing inside of her. After the baby's born, one of the things that we do in my family is we harvest a plant. It's called Nemewashk, in English known as catnip. It's from the mint family. And we'll actually boil a little bit of that and make it into a tea. And then we use that in order to perform the first bath for the baby right at the hospital. And it's really a great experience. It strengthens the baby's constitution and hold on life, but it's also a great bonding experience for the parents, and sometimes with the grandparents and the new baby. So it's really been something I've appreciated as a father with each of my children as they've come into the world, and now having and watching my children do that with their own kids as they come. In addition to that, we have naming ceremonies and all kinds of other ceremonies, a feast after 4 days welcoming the arrival of a new child into the world. And all of these things are not just kind of, functional or formal, but they serve to pull people together and to think about, how we function as a village in the raising of a child. The season of summer, which represents young people, has all kinds of ceremonies too. So for us, the seasonal harvest round is dominated by things like berry picking and fishing and so forth. But in the cycle of a human, this is when young people turn into adults. And we have all kinds of important ceremonies around that. For example, in my family, everybody's participates in harvesting and producing food. So all of the boys and girls are good hunters. And when somebody's has their first time being successful as a hunter, it's a big deal with our family. So the ancient custom was they used to cook up the whole deer, invite over the whole village, and they're all living next to each other, and it would get eaten in one fell swoop. We're busy, kids are going to school, I go to work, and so forth. But what we will do when it's first kill feast day is we'll cook up a bunch of food, including a lot of the venison, but other things too. We'll invite over the extended family, namesakes, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and then there'll be a prayer, but instead of just eating, we will ritually feed the successful hunter. So if the hunter's name is Benesi, meaning thunderbird, we'll take a spoon of the food and we'll offer it to the successful hunter and we'll say Benesi. But Benesi has to refuse the first bite and say, no, I'm thinking of children who don't have enough to eat. Ah, okay, I'll put it back, take another one. Benesi, no, I'm thinking of my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves. Ah, okay, put it back. Benesi, no, I'm thinking of my family, my community, and the people who came here today to support me. Ah, okay. Benesi, and then he can eat. And then we'll just say, Benesi, you just changed your life. Up until today, you were what we called a dependent, meaning you depended on all of the people in this room to provide all of your food. But here you are today, providing for all of us. Now that's what it means to be an adult. From today on, you'll have a special power, and it's the power to gather resources. You'll have it when you hunt, you'll have it when you fish, you'll have it when you gather, you'll have it when you get a job. Use your power to think about children who don't have enough, elders who can't get it for themselves, your family, your community. And then we have the hunter take the rest of their kill, like packaged up venison, and they give it away. So they're impoverished, but rich. And the teaching is your primary value is not in having more than somebody. Your primary value is in how you can take care of other people. I have to say, having numerous children, this is a very powerful ceremony for a lot of them. Uh, One time, one of my friends was complaining that his back was going out and it was hard for him to get in the woods. One of my sons, who had been through his first kill feast a couple of years before, was listening. He didn't say anything, but he went out and harvested a deer. He went over to my friend's house. He filled up his freezer, and that was our way. So these kind of cultural practices reflect the values of a people, but they also shape the values of a people. It's one of the things I love the most about the Ojibwe cultural toolbox. There are also ceremonies like as girls come of age and become women. For us, this is marked when a girl gets her first menstrual period. And I think in the mainstream, sometimes people don't know how to talk about this and don't talk about it very often. But in our world, this is something that is considered positive and beautiful and empowering. And it represents the symbolic and spiritual power of a woman to bring life into the world. It's normal, it's natural. And we actually have a whole year of ceremonies. And kind of like we do at the first kill feast, where there's this special feeding of the successful hunter, we actually do this for a girl during her first year transitioning into womanhood with each traditional food. So we will actually, like, here it's springtime right now, the first feed would probably be a little spoonful of maple syrup. And then a little bit later on, there'd be a feeding of berries when they're first harvested, fresh caught fish, freshly harvested game, and then wild rice, and so forth. And so there's a whole year of ceremonies and feedings. And a lot of these are orchestrated by, aunties, grandmas, female namesakes, and so forth. And they're accompanied with a lot of empowerment teachings. So, for example, a girl will often be told as she's transitioning into womanhood things like this. Um, if you ever see a group of women sitting around visiting, come and sit with us because you're one of us. They'll say things like, you have a right, but also a responsibility to be respected by men. Here is what that means. No one can hit you. No one can call you names. And no one can make you do something sexually that you do not want to do. And I think if we did these ceremonies for all of our girls as they transitioned into womanhood, this world would be a different place, especially if we did these ceremonies for our girls as they transitioned into womanhood with their brothers watching. In the mainstream, we often reinforce different and very conflicting messages about what it means to be an adult, to the point where even if you look at what is prom, and prom is a mini pretend wedding. There's a promenade, kind of like a wedding march, right? People dress up as you would for a wedding, pictures, fancy dinner, and then all these expectations that are placed upon young people about things like dating, kissing, and sex. And I think it's really healthy to center other things as people transition into adulthood. There's a lot of empowerment in that Indigenous cultural toolbox. In the fall season, this is probably our busiest time of the year for harvesting. In Ojibwe country, lots of people are still harvesting wild rice, hunting, fishing. In terms of life cycle, this is adulthood. There are a lot of ceremonies around things like marriage and so forth. And I wanted to briefly share just a couple things about Ojibwe culture that I think are also widely misunderstood. You might hear people talk about things like Indian time, Indian cars, and Indian food. And I think these things are a bit misunderstood. So, for example, if you look at how Indigenous people lived in former times, people were very, very hardworking. They were up early in the morning. And if you didn't do that, there's a good chance that you and your family might go hungry. So it was a requirement as a necessary means for survival. And people were punctual, they were on time, they didn't want to keep anybody waiting. Respect is a deeply held value. And as I've worked with a lot of elders in our community, I've always seen them exemplify that teaching. So to me, Indian time is a factor of colonialism, the idea that being late or being lazy is somehow part of the culture. Tom Stillday, who is an important elder from Panema on the Red Lake Reservation, I think said it really well when he said, Indian time means that I'm going to sit here and do your ceremony as long as it takes to do your ceremony with no shortcuts. But that is never going to be an excuse to be late or lazy. And that's how I view Indian time myself. In addition to that, I wanted to say a little something about, poverty and Native communities. So about half of the tribal population today is dealing with poverty. Uh, Through no fault of our own, lots of Native people have been deprived of land, resources, and even jobs and basic economic opportunity. In spite of that, lots of people are also finding ways to venture out and be successful and so forth. However, because many of us have had an experience with poverty, some of us have internalized the ideas about that as being part of the culture. And when I look at pictures of, you know, Native people from the 1800s or something, they dressed up and they looked good. They were physically fit as a requirement for their survival. They wore beautiful beadwork and took care of themselves and had pride in their personal appearance and so forth. And I think it's important to remember that they probably had fewer resources, financial resources, than even the poorest of us do today. So the idea that somehow poverty is what makes us Indigenous is a little out of sync with our true thinking, even though, and our culture, even though a lot of us have had experiences with poverty. For myself, for example, when I was a kid, there was a time when we had an outhouse, no indoor plumbing or running water. We had a little hand pump where you had to pour some water in the top of it to prime the pump, crank on that thing, and you could get water out of a shallow point well. And we had kerosene lanterns because we didn't have electricity. But I always had enough food to eat. And by the time I hit middle school, my mother had become the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota, built a nice house. And our financial picture changed quite a bit. But I was just as Native before and just as Native after that financial transition. Those things, those markers of identity are things that are carried on the inside, and they're not just the outward facing things. Also, when you think about some of the foods that are traditional in our indigenous diet. In the Ojibwe world, we have a very diverse diet, lots of different kinds of small game, big game, many kinds of berries, mushrooms, tubers, and wild rice. And it's actually a very, very healthy diet. Most of the food was either roasted or boiled. Things were not fried, and people lived a long time. When I was researching the Warrior Nation book, which is a history of Red Lake, I was just stunned by how many people lived to be 100 years old. And this was before there were smallpox, immunizations and things like that. And it's because people had healthy lifestyle choices. So to me, it's just ironic when, we often advertise something like a traditional Indian fry bread taco, and the words probably don't belong in the same sentence. And most people have a grandma who has a special recipe that's especially good. I can be a sucker for a traditional Indian fry bread taco myself. But with the highest rate of diabetes for any racial group in the world, the irony's killing us. And so I think it's good to decolonize our diet. When our people were pushed off of our land and confined to a smaller portion of our original homeland and given rations of lard and flour, we figured out how to make food out of that, fry bread, and we survived. And then it became part of our normal food intake. And so I think it's good to reevaluate that and think about longevity and health and who do we really want to be and who we really are as we decolonize our diet too. The season of winter is characterized by elderhood, and we have lots of ceremonies around that too, and lots of built-in cultural beliefs. In the Ojibwe world, our word for elder, Gichiaya'a, literally means great being. Our word for an elderly woman, Mindemuye, means one who holds things together and describes the role of the family matriarch. So you don't have to say things like respect your elders if you're speaking in Ojibwe. Respect is built in with any word you could possibly use. And we actually have some sayings in Ojibwe. One, like if a young person does a act of service, a good deed for an elder, the elder might touch their head and touch the kid's head and say, Wabikwan Bejikiminin, like, and what it means is, I'm giving you a white hair. It's a way of saying you get to be an elder too someday. You'll get there one good deed at a time. And so I think it's a really beautiful and powerful teaching that there's something to look forward to with each season, spring, summer, fall, and winter, and with each phase of life, babies, young people, adults, and elders, and that the cultural toolbox has a lot to equip us for our best possible life and being the best possible versions of ourselves. My name's Anton Troyer. Thanks so much for listening. Miigwech. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Troyer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, free Ojibwe language resources, resources for teachers, and more. Miigwech.